On the morning of September 29th, 1948, something happened that shocked the world. Seretse Khama, an African royal heir, Oxford-educated intellectual and future leader of Botswana, married Ruth Williams, a white English woman. At the time, the marriage was considered an abomination. At the most visible level, the controversy about their marriage was about race. At the time Seretse Khama married Ruth, the world was still structured by rigid racial hierarchies. South Africa had just introduced apartheid laws, including bans on interracial marriage. A black African royal marrying a white British woman was unthinkable and seen as a direct challenge to white supremacy. To apartheid leaders, the union was not just offensive, it was dangerous, because it symbolized racial equality. Seretse Khama was not an ordinary man. He was the heir to the Bamangwato chieftaincy in Bechuanaland, a British protectorate. His marriage raised fears among colonial officials that a white woman could become queen of an African people. British authorities worried this would undermine colonial control and provoke unrest, both among white settlers in southern Africa and within traditional African leadership structures. Within months, he was banished from his homeland, stripped of his right to rule, cast out not for treason, but for refusing to abandon his wife. Ruth, vilified and isolated, followed him into exile, her life permanently altered by a vow spoken in a quiet room. The shock was global because the marriage shattered an illusion. It exposed the moral bankruptcy of empire and revealed how fragile racial supremacy truly was. Seretse Khama did not raise an army or lead a rebellion that day, but with a single "I do," he shook the foundations of colonial power. In this video, we shall shine the light on one of the most controversial interracial marriages in modern African history and how their union changed the political landscape in southern Africa. This is the story of love, betrayal, and compromise. This is the shocking love story of Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams. Seretse Khama was born on July 1st, 1921, into one of the most powerful royal families in southern Africa, at a time when colonial rule shaped every aspect of African political life. He was born in Seretse, in the British protectorate of Bechuanaland, as the grandson of Seretse Khama III, a legendary leader who had successfully resisted incorporation into white-ruled Rhodesia and South Africa. Seretse's destiny was marked from birth, but it was sealed even earlier than expected when his father, Seretse Khama II, died in 1925. At just 4 years old, Seretse became the rightful heir to the Bamangwato chieftaincy. Because Seretse was too young to rule, leadership passed to his uncle, Tshekedi Khama, who became regent. Tshekedi was a stern, disciplined traditionalist who believed deeply in both Tswana custom and the strategic use of Western education. He took personal responsibility for shaping Seretse into a future leader capable of defending his people's interests in a colonial world. Under Tshekedi's supervision, Seretse received an education that blended African values with European schooling, an unusual but deliberate preparation for leadership. Seretse began his formal education in Bechuanaland before being sent abroad, first to Fort Hare University in South Africa, one of the few institutions at the time that educated Black Africans at a high academic level. Fort Hare exposed him to a wider African intelligentsia and to early nationalist thought, though Seretse remained cautious rather than radical. As racial segregation intensified in South Africa, Tshekedi decided it was safer and more strategic for Seretse to continue his studies in Britain. In England, Seretse attended Balliol College, Oxford, where he studied philosophy, politics, and economics. Oxford refined his intellectual outlook and exposed him to democratic ideals, rule of law, and liberal thought. Unlike many African elites who became deeply radicalized abroad, Seretse developed a pragmatic worldview, believing change could be achieved through institutions rather than violent confrontation. After Oxford, he moved to London to study law at the Inner Temple, preparing himself for leadership in both traditional and modern political systems. Life in post-war London was formative. Britain was rebuilding after World War II, and while racism existed, the city offered Seretse a degree of personal freedom unknown in colonial Africa. For the first time, he lived largely as an individual rather than solely as a future chief. He interacted with students, church groups, and professionals from across the Commonwealth. These social circles, particularly those connected to the London Missionary Society, would later prove significant. By 1947, Seretse Khama was a young man standing at a crossroads. He was intellectually confident, legally trained, and conscious of his obligations to the Bamangwato. At the same time, he was experiencing life beyond rigid tradition and colonial expectation. It was within this space, between duty and personal freedom, that Seretse Khama would soon meet Ruth Williams, an encounter that would transform his life and alter the course of African and imperial history. Seretse Khama met Ruth Williams at a moment when his life seemed clearly mapped out by tradition, empire, and destiny, yet fate quietly intervened in the most ordinary of settings. In 1947, Seretse Khama was living in London, studying law at the Inner Temple after completing studies at Oxford. He was not merely another African student abroad, he was the rightful heir to the chieftaincy of the Bamangwato people of Bechuanaland, a British protectorate. His education in Britain was meant to prepare him for leadership under colonial oversight, blending traditional authority with Western legal training. London, still recovering from the Second World War, was a city of rationing, rebuilding, and subdued social life, yet it also offered spaces where people from different worlds could unexpectedly meet. Ruth Williams was a young Englishwoman working as a clerk at Lloyd's of London. She came from a modest working-class background in Croydon and lived a life shaped by routine rather than political ambition. She was not part of elite circles, nor did she have any connection to colonial administration or African affairs. Their meeting was not orchestrated by diplomats or intellectual salons, but occurred at a social gathering arranged by mutual friends from the London Missionary Society circle. At the time, interracial social interaction was rare and often frowned upon, but wartime Britain had temporarily softened some racial barriers. When Seretse and Ruth first spoke, there was no dramatic declaration or instant scandal, only conversation, curiosity, and an unexpected sense of understanding. Their relationship developed gradually. Seretse was intelligent, reflective, and deeply aware of his responsibilities, while Ruth was straightforward, warm, and unpretentious. They bonded over shared values rather than shared backgrounds. Seretse found in Ruth a person who treated him not as a prince or political symbol, but as a man. Ruth, in turn, saw beyond his status and skin color, recognizing his kindness, seriousness, and quiet humor. As their affection deepened, both were aware that their relationship crossed boundaries that society guarded fiercely. Interracial relationships were controversial even in Britain, and for a man destined to rule an African people under British supervision, the stakes were infinitely higher. When Seretse informed his family and advisors back home of his intention to marry Ruth, resistance was immediate and intense. His uncle, Seretse Khama, who was serving as a regent of the Bamangwato, was particularly opposed. Seretse believed that such a marriage would undermine Seretse's legitimacy as chief and provoke both internal unrest and colonial interference. Among the Bamangwato, some elders were concerned not purely about race, but about tradition, fearing that a foreign woman would not understand or respect their customs. Meanwhile, British colonial officials viewed the situation through a political lens, worried about how white settlers and, more critically, apartheid-era South Africa would react. Despite mounting opposition, Seretse refused to abandon Ruth. He insisted that his right to choose a wife was fundamental and that his people should judge him by his leadership, not his marriage. In September 1948, after months of uncertainty and pressure, Seretse and Ruth decided to proceed. There was no grand wedding. On September 29, 1948, they were married in a quiet civil ceremony in London. The simplicity of the event contrasted sharply with the storm it unleashed. There were no royal honors, no official blessings, and no representatives from the colonial administration. Yet the act itself carried enormous symbolic weight. News of the marriage spread rapidly and ignited outrage far beyond Britain. South Africa, which had just institutionalized apartheid, reacted with fury. Its leaders warned Britain that recognizing or tolerating the marriage would destabilize racial order in southern Africa. Britain, heavily dependent on South Africa for economic and strategic reasons, panicked. What should have been a private matter was elevated into a matter of state. The British government convened inquiries, debated Seretse's suitability to rule, and framed his marriage as a political problem rather than a personal choice. Ruth, who had married out of love rather than ambition, found herself vilified in the press. She was portrayed as reckless, manipulative, or naive, while racist undertones permeated public commentary. Seretse, meanwhile, was scrutinized not as a husband, but as a potential threat to colonial stability. In 1950, after a controversial investigation that many saw as biased, the British government banished Seretse from Bechuanaland, effectively exiling him for marrying the woman he loved. Ruth followed him into exile, enduring isolation, financial hardship, and constant hostility. Yet the marriage endured. What began as a meeting between two ordinary people in post-war London became a defining episode in African and imperial history. Seretse and Ruth's union exposed the hypocrisy of colonial rule, challenged racial ideology, and reshaped Seretse's destiny. Stripped of traditional authority, he eventually turned to democratic politics, leading Botswana to independence and becoming its first prime minister and president. Their marriage, once condemned as scandalous, came to be recognized as a quiet act of courage, proof that a deeply personal decision could confront and ultimately outlast the power of empire. The marriage between Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams was controversial and scandalous because it struck at the heart of the racial, political, and colonial order of the mid-20th century. What appeared to be a private union between two individuals became a global crisis because it challenged systems that depended on racial separation, imperial control, and political expediency. The most immediate source of controversy was race. In 1948, interracial marriage was deeply stigmatized across much of the world. In southern Africa, racial hierarchy was not only social but institutional. South Africa had just formally introduced apartheid, including laws that criminalized marriages between black and white people. Seretse Khama, a black African royal marrying a white British woman, directly contradicted the ideological foundation of apartheid. To white minority governments, the marriage was not merely offensive, it was a dangerous symbol that undermined the belief in racial superiority. The scandal was intensified by Seretse Khama's status. He was not an ordinary man, but the rightful heir to the Bamangwato chieftaincy in Bechuanaland, a British protectorate. His marriage raised fears among colonial officials that a white woman would become queen of an African people, something they believed would disrupt traditional authority and provoke unrest. British administrators worried that African subjects might reject a white chief's wife, while white settlers feared the symbolic collapse of racial boundaries. A decisive factor was British geopolitical anxiety. Britain depended heavily on South Africa for trade, minerals, and regional security. South African leaders applied intense diplomatic pressure, warning that recognition of the marriage would damage relations and destabilize southern Africa. Rather than defend Seretse's personal freedom, Britain prioritized its strategic interests. This led to a series of investigations and political maneuvers designed to remove Seretse from power without openly admitting racial bias. The marriage also exposed colonial hypocrisy. Britain publicly promoted Christian morality, democracy, and individual rights, yet it punished Seretse for exercising those very principles. Parliamentary debates and newspaper coverage turned a man's choice of wife into a matter of state. Ruth Williams was vilified in the press, often portrayed through racist and sexist stereotypes, while Seretse was depicted as irresponsible for choosing love over political convenience. Finally, the scandal lay in what the marriage represented, a challenge to the idea that empire could control African lives at the most personal level. By refusing to abandon Ruth, Seretse Khama defied both colonial authority and racial ideology. The resulting exile, banishment, and political fallout transformed their marriage into a symbol of resistance. In essence, the union was scandalous not because it violated moral values, but because it threatened systems built on inequality, fear, and control, making love itself a political act. The marriage of Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams had far-reaching consequences that extended beyond their personal lives, affecting colonial policy, racial politics, and the future of Botswana. At its core, the union challenged entrenched racial norms and exposed the moral contradictions of British colonial rule. By marrying a white English woman, Seretse directly confronted the racial hierarchies of Southern Africa, particularly apartheid South Africa, which viewed the marriage as a threat to its ideological and political stability. Britain, under pressure from Pretoria, initially exiled Seretse, highlighting how colonial governance often prioritized political convenience over justice and individual rights. The personal consequences for the couple were profound. Seretse was stripped of his chieftaincy and banned from returning to Bechuanaland, while Ruth followed him into exile, facing social ostracism and isolation. Despite these hardships, their marriage endured, demonstrating resilience, loyalty, and courage. This perseverance became a public symbol of resistance against racial prejudice and colonial interference, inspiring international attention and sympathy. Politically, the marriage shaped Seretse's trajectory and ultimately Botswana's destiny. His exile pushed him from traditional leadership toward modern democratic politics, where he championed equality, non-racialism, and the rule of law. Upon his return, he renounced the chieftaincy to lead Botswana as its first prime minister, guiding the nation toward independence and stability. Beyond Botswana, the marriage left a global legacy. It became a quiet but powerful testament to the transformative potential of personal choices in confronting injustice. Their union highlighted the arbitrary nature of racial barriers and exposed the hypocrisies of colonial power, influencing broader conversations about race, governance, and human rights in the mid-20th century. In this sense, their love story was not merely personal, it was revolutionary. The legacy of Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams Khama is one of courage, resilience, and transformative influence, both in Botswana and on the global stage. Their story is remembered not only as a personal tale of love against all odds, but as a defining moment in the fight against racial prejudice and the assertion of African self-determination during the era of colonial rule. At the most immediate level, their legacy lies in challenging entrenched racial barriers. In the late 1940s, interracial marriage was deeply stigmatized, particularly in Southern Africa, where apartheid was consolidating. By marrying Ruth, Seretse confronted these social and political boundaries head-on. Their union became a symbol that personal choices could defy institutionalized racism. The global attention their marriage drew exposed the moral contradictions of colonial governance, forcing Britain and the wider world to reckon with the human consequences of racially discriminatory policies. In this sense, their love was not merely personal, it was revolutionary. Politically, Seretse Khama's legacy was profoundly shaped by his experience with Ruth. Exiled from his homeland because of their marriage, he returned with a renewed commitment to democratic principles, non-racialism, and rule of law. He renounced traditional chieftaincy to embrace modern political leadership, eventually becoming the first president of independent Botswana. Under his guidance, Botswana developed into one of Africa's most stable, prosperous, and democratic nations. Ruth played a critical role in supporting him, often working behind the scenes to help maintain social cohesion and assist in diplomatic and civic initiatives. Their partnership demonstrated that leadership could be shared and that effective governance could be rooted in principles of equality and mutual respect. Beyond Botswana, their story has enduring symbolic power. It stands as an inspiration for couples who challenge social norms, for leaders who confront injustice, and for societies striving to reconcile tradition with modern values. Their marriage, once considered scandalous, is now celebrated as a courageous act that reshaped political and social landscapes. Finally, their family continued this legacy. Their children, particularly Khama, carried forward the values of public service, national development, and principled leadership. Through both personal and political impact, Seretse and Ruth Khama's legacy is a testament to the transformative power of love, integrity, and resilience, proving that individual choices can echo across generations and alter the course of history.